Okay, I think the technical difficulties are done. Hopefully it's recording. Let's see. We might spend 30 minutes chatting, but anyways, hello, Dr. Scott. Thank you for joining me.
Hey, Julien, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, thank you. I figured I spent so much time on Reddit and on all these rabbit holes on mold illness that, I have access to you, and I think it'd be great if I was able to actually ask you some of the questions that I see in the community.
So why?
Thank you. I was exposed to mold when I was in college. I started on the binders pretty recently, and I think like a lot of the people, you get hit with so much information on Reddit about what you should do, what you shouldn't do, which protocols are good, which ones you should avoid. And so since we started working on mold together and on mold toxicity recovery, I figured that it would be a great opportunity for us to get started and start clarifying some of those questions with your help. And maybe before we do that, I'd love to give you a little short intro. So without further ado, Scott, again, thank you for joining me. So Dr. Scott is our medical director. You actually joined MoldCo officially at the beginning of last month. And so you're in charge at MoldCo of supervising our entire provider team and supervising our treatment protocol. So thank you for joining me on this little session. I think we're going to be calling it Dr. Scott Answers. And so if we like it and the format works, I'd love to work with you on finding a couple of questions on Reddit each week and figuring out which ones we can answer and which one could be helpful.
That'd be great, Julien. As you know, I've been studying this field of medicine for about 15 years, seen a couple thousand patients, written 10 or so medical articles. I've been involved in somewhere between 100 and 200 different medical legal cases. And I've had the privilege of teaching doctors on 3 different continents. So I hope I'm prepared for whatever questions you might bring my way.
I think it's gonna be perfectly fine. You have all the experience you need. And maybe quickly about myself. So my name is Julien. I am on the growth team here at MoldCo. For those who've never heard of MoldCo, MoldCo is a telehealth platform. And our objective is to bring some of the advanced protocols that are research and evidence-based to everybody to help people on their path to recover from mold toxicity. We're currently available in Texas and Florida, and our objective is to roll out nationwide by the end of the year. If you're interested in recovery that is affordable and accessible online with the best providers that are trained under the supervision of Dr. Scott, MoldCo is going to be offering that very soon for you. Scott, if that's all right, I actually have a little presentation that I put together with all of the different questions that I thought were interesting. I just looked at the most popular ones and I wanted to see if we could answer them together. So if you're ready for that, I'm actually going to share my screen real quick. And there we are. You should be able to start seeing my first question. This one's about CRP. And when I saw that question, the first thing I asked myself is, what the heck is CRP? Why is CRP decreasing something that matters? And I also see mentioning TGF beta 1 as one of the biomarkers that are being asked in that question. So I'd love to ask in general, what are the biomarkers that you think are relevant for mold toxicity and can help people understand how their body is reacting and, how it might also be progressing over time as they start their treatments.
Okay, thank you, Julien. So CRP is C-reactive protein. It is what's called an acute phase reactant. And that's a fancy term. It means that as your body is getting inflammation, your CRP tends to go up. But there are different pathways in your body that can lead to inflammation and, in essence, different kinds of inflammation. In fact, most people have heard of rheumatology or a rheumatologist, and that's a study of all sorts of different kinds of autoimmune illnesses that are caused by your body making excess antibody to your body. So you're actually making parts of your body to kill parts of your body. That's not very smart. And in diseases like that, like lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, dermatomyositis, we usually see that the CRP is elevated. In fact, it can be very, very elevated. But there are other processes in the body, like certain viral infections, that will cause inflammation, but don't cause the CRP to go up, or very rarely cause the CRP to go up. So that's really common, actually, is maybe only 10% of certain viral infections cause CRP to increase, even though there's inflammation. It's also well known that Lyme disease, which is a bacterial illness, in its acute form, doesn't cause CRP to go up. And in chronic inflammatory response syndrome, or the mold-based illness that I've spent the last 15 years treating, CRP rarely goes up, maybe 10% of the time. So it's not that useful of a biomarker for people that have SIRS. But there are some that we do look at that are very commonly elevated, particularly when you're first presenting with the illness. TGF-beta1 that you mentioned, or human transforming growth factor, the beta-1 type, because there's beta-1, beta-2, and beta-3. But the beta-1 type is a master controller of the innate immune system, and it is elevated in new patients probably around 80% of the time. Another one that we look at is called C4A. That's a big capital C, a 4, and a little a. C4A is a split product of a complement protein. Ooh, there's a mouthful. So complement is this complicated system in your body that your body uses to try and destroy bacteria and fungi and other invaders into your body. And there's a complement protein called C4. And when it becomes activated, it breaks into two parts, C4A and C4B. So it gets split into C4A and C4B. So C4A is a split product. We see that that's also elevated about 80% of the time in new patients that have SIRS. And then another one that we look at, another called a cytokine, Cytokine. It's a chemical of the innate immune system. That cytokine is called MMP-9, or matrix metalloproteinase number 9. There's a whole bunch of different kinds of MMPs. It's just the ninth one. And MMP-9 is commonly elevated, probably close to 70% of the time in new patients who have SIRS. So those are the cytokines. Those are the biological markers of the immune system that we look at when we're evaluating somebody with SIRS.
One of the questions I often ask myself, based on what you just said, is perhaps those biomarkers could be affected by something else, right? It might not always be SIRS. And from what I understand, it's the relationship between some of those that actually helps indicate with a higher degree of certainty that SIRS and mold toxicity might be the culprit. So could you tell me a little bit more about, what the relationship between those biomarkers can actually help tell us, and again, like how sure we are that this mold could be the cause behind it?
Well, you're right. I mean, certain lab tests, when they're abnormal, don't by themselves mean that somebody has SIRS. For instance, you could have multiple sclerosis and you could have an elevated MMP-9 level, or C4A can be elevated in any bacterial infection that you have in your body. So you could potentially have a pneumonia or a sinus infection or a urinary tract infection. And if that infection had an opportunity to see the bloodstream, you probably would have an elevation in C4A. But what we don't see in some of these other illnesses is that you have multiple cytokines. You have TGF-beta1 and MMP-9 and C4A elevated. You usually just see one or none of them elevated. Another couple of tests that we look at are called which is alpha melanocyte stimulating hormone, and VIP, which is vasoactive intestinal polypeptide. These are both chemicals that actually help to regulate or control the innate immune system. The perfect example would be if you were to get a cold or the flu, you would see your innate immune system rise up and you would start making different cytokines. And those cytokines make you feel crummy. And then as your body defeats the virus that's causing that illness, you need a chemical signal to bring all those cytokines and the overproduction of the cytokines back down to normal. It's VIP and MSH that are the major players to bring everything back to normal so that you feel great after you've had your cold or your flu or even COVID for that matter. What we'll see in almost everybody with SIRS is that either VIP or MSH or both of them are actually low. So you're not able to regulate that innate immune system the way you're supposed to. You're not able to turn off that overproduction of the other cytokines. And then when you couple that with an elevated C4A or an elevated MMP-9 or an elevated TGF-beta1, and you see that it's still elevated when it shouldn't be, that's pretty indicative of SIRS. You've got a problem with regulation in the immune system, and you've got evidence that you're overproducing at least one and oftentimes multiple cytokines. So it's not just a single abnormal lab test that means you have SIRS. It's a combination. Most patients will have 4, 5, 6 abnormalities in their immune system. And that's what distinguishes SIRS, or chronic inflammatory response syndrome, from every other illness.
Thank you, Dr. Scott. That was great. I wanted to ask you another question. When people want to get those tests and want to start getting answers, very often it seems that they can be dismissed by their current medical provider or clinician or their family doctor. And, I often ask myself why also and where it comes from. So would you mind, telling me how often that happens and what is your interpretation of, I guess, more traditional doctors being maybe not anti-SIRS, but at least not recognizing it as a potential cause for some of the symptoms that people are experiencing?
Well, now you're kind of picking a sore subject for me here, Julien. I went through a lot of years of school and training to become a medical doctor. I was trained in the Western form of medical doctors, and I'm an allopathic doctor. But I also have been trained to follow the evidence. And you follow the evidence. And when you look at the amount of evidence in the medical literature about mold-based illness, it's actually overwhelming and it's exceedingly one-sided. The problem is, I think a lot of doctors don't read that literature. They're not aware. And if they actually look it up, they're looking at studies that were maybe that were written 20 years ago, and possibly by people who are medical experts that try and testify in court to say that this doesn't exist. There's very little literature that is negative toward mold-based illness. There is a tremendous amount that, I mean like hundreds of studies. But the problem is many doctors are just not familiar with that. So when you come to their office and you have brain fog and chronic fatigue and stomach issues and muscle and joint pains, and you feel like sleeping all the time and you can't exercise anymore, and you have this cacophony of symptoms. You urinate 15 times a day. They don't know what's wrong with you. They literally do not know what's wrong with you. And their training hasn't prepared them for you. And so you're left with a couple of choices, or the doctor is left with a couple of choices. One of them is to say, I'm sorry, ma'am, I don't know what's wrong with you. I'm going to refer you on to someone else who might. But more likely, they're going to run all the tests that they know how to do, all the things that are in their wheelhouse. And unfortunately, most of those come back normal. Like the CRP will come back normal most of the time if you have chronic inflammatory response syndrome. So their response will be then that if it's not something that they can discern through their history or their physical exam or the lab tests that they do, the only other thought in their mind is, well, maybe it's all in your head. And so they may give you a diagnosis of somaticization, where your brain is basically creating symptoms. That's what they believe, because their lab tests don't show anything is wrong. And a physical exam doesn't fit with any illnesses they're aware of. So we're actually outside of what they know. And again, you're left with, I can say, I don't know what's wrong with you. A lot of doctors don't have that kind of humility. Or they can say, well, this must be in your head. And so they end up sending you to the psychiatrist or psychologist as though you're making this up, or as maybe you're not making it up intentionally, but maybe your brain is making it up to compensate for something else. And unfortunately, that's just something we're taught in medical school, that if it doesn't fit any obvious pattern, then maybe it's in the head. And that can be triggered by stress. That can be triggered by a lot of potential things. And that is kind of the go-to answer. So the doctor, in their ignorance, may kind of gaslight you and tell you that, there really is nothing wrong with you, or there really is nothing wrong with your child, because everything that I know how to look for, I can't find anything. But there's another option there, Julien. And this is the one that is hard to take. And that is, it's possible that you have an illness that I'm not familiar with, that is diagnosed by lab tests that I don't know what they are. And it's just outside of my expertise. And that's the place where they usually don't go, but they really should. And if they spent a few minutes on the internet, they could find out about this. And if they gave me a phone call, I would talk to them all day and teach them about this illness. And then they wouldn't have to have that kind of useless answer that actually, when you're telling somebody who's really sick, who has chronic fatigue and has a hard time getting out of bed every day, when you're telling them, well, I think this is all in your head and maybe you just need an SSRI, it's really to some degree abusive toward the patient. And so,
well, I was going to say, I think it's discouraging. I mean, you've seen many providers, you've done a whole battery of testing, and you get to the same starting point where you still don't know what you have, but you're experiencing those symptoms. And the answer you're getting is basically, this could be just in your head. And you know, deep down that physically it is not. There's two paths here. I mean, we've talked about the biomarkers that we can do, biomarker testing, and how, the first question I would ask myself here is, how can I get my provider to potentially order those biomarkers? And if that's not a possibility, and I can understand why it wouldn't, what can I do to actually get the right type of testing here, right? Is there anything I can do as a patient to sort of steer my provider in the right direction, or even just find someone that can help me?
Well, some providers will read a book if you bring it to them, something like Surviving Mold, written by Dr. Richie Shoemaker back in 2010. And they'll actually read that. But that book is 700 pages. And to be honest with you, when I was in active practice, I probably wouldn't have read that or in its entirety. Doctors will also read medical papers if you bring them to them, but then you have to find a medical paper. Or you could just specifically ask them, would you order an MSH for me as a screening test? Would you order an MMP9, a TGF-beta1, or a C4A? But if you can't explain why you want it, they might not do it. An alternative is to go to MoldCo.com, where you're going to be dealing with providers that are very familiar with this topic and know all about the biomarkers and can bring you to treatment much more quickly.
Thank you so much. I think it's time for our last question, if you're ready for it. I wanted to talk something, or discuss something that was connected to mold removal. It's definitely a topic where there's a lot of different opinions being shared about whether or not you have to get rid of all your furniture, what to do after you've detected the mold, it's already in your environment, it's impacted your home, to make sure that wherever you go next, it can be a clean environment that's going to be conducive to a good recovery. So I thought this question was an excellent one because it really breaks down 4 of the most common sub-questions that we see on Reddit. What you need to do with your exposed furniture. Is there a protocol to actually protect your furniture during remediation? And then, HIPAA vacuums and what to do afterwards to make sure you're removing anything that might be left. Even there, I like to ask myself also what kind of air filters I can keep running at this point. So this is a pretty broad question, but I'd love to get your opinion on what happens when the mold removal is happening and what can you do to protect yourself as you move into your new environment?
Well, that's a really important topic, Julien. I'm glad you brought it up. First of all, I would recommend, if you've had some sort of mold inspection, or if you did your own ERMI or your own HRSMI 2, generally speaking, I don't recommend that you do it yourself, that you do the remediation yourself. If it's something really, really small, maybe you can do that. But a lot of mold remediators don't know the right way to do it so that they don't make you more sick in your home by just ripping things out. There are engineering controls that need to be in place to try and keep particles that are maybe were trapped in the cavity of the wall, and now you're ripping out the sheetrock, and now you're spraying that throughout your entire house or apartment. I mean, it can really be disastrous if it is done incorrectly. And I recommend that most people, when they're looking for a remediator, that they make sure that the remediator has taken the medically important remediation 101 course that's offered at SURSAC. And in fact, I recommend that for patients too, that they become familiar with the right way to do remediation versus the wrong way. Because unfortunately, in the same way that there are doctors and there are variable amounts of knowledge amongst remediators, there's also variable amounts of knowledge about this illness and how it can make people sick. Now, some people will recommend that you just throw all your possessions away. I don't think that's necessary. I think that's overkill. And some people will do it anyway, just for peace of mind. But there are 3 rules that would follow that should help guide you with most of your possessions. So if it's something that's non-porous, it doesn't absorb water, like glass or your glasses that you drink out, like your silverware, like your plates and dishes, things like that. They don't absorb water. Those can be cleaned, packed, and taken, for instance, to your new place or taken out of the place while you're being remediated, or you can clean them in different ways. And by the way, if somebody is remediating your house, I don't recommend that you stay there. You probably should locate yourself at a friend's house or at a hotel. But number one is the non-porous items, they can be cleaned.
And so what about, I'm interrupting you here because, for example, we bought a nice piece of furniture with my girlfriend. It's made out of wood, and that would break my heart if I had to get rid of it. So what would be your recommendation here? I'm sure a lot of people are going to have a particular attachment to a particular piece of furniture, and it might be a porous material like wood. And so what would be the right decision here, for your own health?
So wood is actually in the second group that I talk about, and that is it's semi-porous. Wood can absorb water, but it takes a lot of water and a lot of time. It just doesn't absorb nearly as much as, say, paper products. So with a wood desk or wood furniture, wooden chairs, usually those can be taken outside and cleaned. If there's actually mold on that wood, usually you can sand it down using a HEPA filter vacuum to kind of suck up the dust as you're going, or it can be repainted, or repaint's the wrong word. It can be, you can put something like Kills on it to encapsulate the mold that's on it, and then repaint over that. And then the third group of things is the porous things that have water in them. Not water, things that absorb water, like papers and whatnot. Or even more importantly, like beds, mattresses, linens, your favorite couch. So if it's leather or naga hide or something like that, most people think that you can clean that off. You take it outside of your place, you clean every square inch, every square centimeter that you can to get the dust off. And this is a really important point. You're trying to get the dust off. You're not trying to kill any mold, because dead mold makes SIRS people sick also. Because your body can have that same immune system reaction to dead mold. You want to get the dust off because it's there where the mold and the little fragments of old dead molds that can also trigger you if that's where they live. So you get all the dust off. It's the same with if you have a wooden desk that maybe has some intricacies in it, you want to get all of that dust off all of those little intricacies so that you're not carrying anything to your new place. Or if you bring it back into your house, it's getting remediated. You're not bringing old mold back into your now clean place. Things like mattresses. Different people have different ideas. Some people say you just have to throw your mattress away. I say go to Walmart and spend $25 or $30 and get a plastic cover that encapsulates the entire mattress. Make sure it has a zipper on it so it's completely encapsulated. And then if you're not reacting to it afterwards, you just saved $1,000. But if you are reacting to it, then I guess you need to dispose of it and get a new one. I think that all of your sheets and pillow slips and things like that can be washed. There's some controversy there too. Some people say you wash it once and you're fine. Other people say that you need to wash it 4 times. And some people say you need to wash it 4 times and add some borax each time. I think that 4 times with borax might be overkill, but if that's what you need for peace of mind, then that's what I would suggest you do. It's the same with your clothing. It can be washed. And generally speaking, when we wash, we recommend washing off-site. So like at a laundromat or something. So it's not in the same house where you already have mold kind of floating around because you don't want the mold landing on it. And once you clean it, you should pack it away until you either are moving back in or you move to your new place, depending on which one that you're doing.
And one question I have on this actually is that for people like me who are renters and have the opportunity to move into a new place, let's say after a month or two after discovering the mold, and let's say I make a decision to bring a piece of furniture it turns out that I continue having some of the symptoms, right? I start on the binders, I'm on a new clean environment. I made sure this environment was clean as well, which is an important part of the next steps. But I realized that there's still something going on that is causing symptoms, or at least I suspect a continuous exposure despite moving into a new environment. How could I go about zeroing into the culprit or finding out if there's a particular piece of furniture or clothing or something that I brought from my previous home that's continuing the exposure?
Yeah, if you didn't do the cleaning like what I'm describing, then it's probably everything that you brought, and you need to go through that cleaning right away. If you did do the cleaning, like we're describing, the most common thing is going to be if you brought furniture over that didn't have naga hide or leather, but actually had like fabric as the covering on it, or chairs that had fabric with them. Studies have shown that the mold hyphae, that's the actively growing part of the mold, that they can actually intercalate themselves into the fibers of that. So you can't clean that. Some people will tell you you can clean those anyway. And if you bring those over, even if you've cleaned them and HEPA filter vacuumed every square centimeter of them, you may still have mold there. And so you may have to throw it away. There are some people that are very sensitive, Julien. They can go into a house or somebody's apartment and they can tell you right where the mold is, or that might be you. That might be you, the renter, and you can actually feel different in your body when you're around something that is a mold exposure. And so I say trust your body. And if that means you need to give that sofa away, or even better, just get rid of it, then I say that's what you should do.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Scott. I think that answers the 3 questions that I thought were most relevant for today's session. So I really appreciate you taking the time to jump on this call. And, if you had a good time as well, I'd love to do this again. Maybe on a weekly basis, maybe something else, but it was great. And I hope the community likes it. If you do like it, feel free to drop a comment or a little like, and we'll keep this going.
Let's do it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Good talking to you, Julien.
Good talking to you, Scott.